So today is the 13th session, and we have today Dr. Andrew West, psychiatrist. He is been a consultant at Berkshire Healthcare NHS Trust as a child and adolescent psychiatrist previously. He is still working actively, and he currently consults to Wellington College in Berkshire. He is a project partner with Collaborating Centre for Values-Based Practice in Health and Social Care at St. Catherine's College, Oxford, and is also a coach and a mentor to medical and allied health professionals through the Thames Valley and Wessex NHS Leadership Academy through an honorary contract. He runs his own blog and he's published books, as you will see on his introduction that has been circulated around. Dr. Andrew West is speaking to us today on how we approach the new normal, because obviously things are opening up. We are in a new phase where we have anticipation of getting back to our normal work patterns, getting back to our normal life, but also there is a bit of apprehension, and how we approach that is what Dr. Andrew West will speak to us about. There will also be some introduction into how coaching perspectives build into that and how values-based practice can be helpful in getting into the flow again. So without saying very much more, can I please request you, Andrew, to take the floor? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Vivek. Thank you, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I have to confess that I wasn't following the webinar series as you were going along, but I was able to catch up with quite a number of the webinars and was really impressed with the quality of what you've been doing. And this is obviously a valuable resource for doctors. It's not the only one. There are, fortunately, quite a lot of people thinking about how to support each other and to support doctors and other professionals through this difficult time. Yes, Vivek asked me if I'd do something about the new normal, and that's, well, it's quite an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because we don't really know quite what is coming next. I think, Matt, in one of your talks, you said that a leader has to be able to look around the corner, and I think that's true, but we look around the corner and there seem to be quite a wide range of possibilities ahead of us. So I thought what I would do is I would really share with you my thinking, my approach to this, and hopefully it will be interesting. So what I'm dividing what I'm saying up broadly into three areas. I'm thinking about why we might be keen to, so I'm just going to hide the thumbnails just because they're blocking out part of my screen. So why we might be keen to reach a new normal. I'm then going to sound a note of caution about undue haste in deciding that we're at that phase. And I'm going to then outline some ideas from the coaching practice. If any of you are coaches, this will be extremely familiar, and some of it may be familiar in any case. But it's really because this way of working that we're doing right now is not my favorite one, really. I generally work with individuals, happy to work with teams and groups of people and so on, but I like to, the way that I work, I metaphorically place myself alongside the person I'm working with, looking together at whatever their project is. And each of you is in a different situation. So you're going to have different interests and different priorities. But I thought in that third section, what I would do is I would set out some of the tools that one might use in that sort of setting. And in particular, I wanted to introduce the idea of values-based practice, which is one of the things that I am interested in. So just before we look at the new normal, I thought it'd be worth just remembering why, and indeed this is one of the reasons why we're so keen to establish a new normal, or at least get out of this acute phase, why this was such a threat. it was and remains, of course, a very personal threat, a threat to the self of individuals working in the front line, but also a threat to their important others. And a particular complication of that is the possibility as a health worker that one might be the vector that leads to illness in an important other. I think there's also, in many people, a lack of practiced confidence. We learn a great deal of stuff. We've got a lot of head knowledge, a lot of book knowledge, but there's really nothing to replace the muscle memory or the procedural memory of practice. And this different situation, I think, moved quite a lot of people into areas of practice that they weren't familiar with. The idea of caring for somebody with layers of plastic between you and them, or indeed caring for someone that you might be afraid could infect you, or at a distance, or all sorts of things about it were new, and some people were redeployed into areas that they weren't so familiar with. There was a great deal of uncertainty. It was an unfolding scenario. There was rapidly changing public information, and kind of bolstered by the internet, really, there was, I think, arguably an overload of information. It was important to ration the information that one received, try and make sure that it was from a reliable resource. And all of these things really impacted on the sense of agency and involvement, engaged involvement and agency that makes work possible, really. Added to that, well, I heard this from Simon Worsley at a Royal College of Psychiatry webinar fairly near the beginning of the pandemic, or at least the beginning of us realizing that we were in the throes of a pandemic, pointing out that there was really something quite unique about social distancing. In the Blitz, for example, we were all under threat. I say we, but it wasn't me, or probably any of us, but you know what I mean. But people were packed into cinemas and theatres and so on, and many paid the price as a result of that. So it's obviously for extremely good reasons that social distancing is introduced, but it has meant that a lot of people are isolated in a way that they weren't used to being. So these things made this really quite a difficult time, and it's therefore perfectly understandable that people will want to move out of it. Some people will be cautious about emerging from lockdown, and we've seen that already. I think I actually probably number myself amongst one of the relatively cautious people. Some people will be trying to predict what is coming and preparing for it. Some people will want to return to normality, and some people will be interested in establishing a new normality. Here's a picture of some people attempting to return and go back to normal. And here's a picture that I used in a blog piece that I wrote about remote working, and it symbolizes, I think, some people's one of the things that some people hope to take out of all of this into the new normal, which might be more remote working. How nice it would be to be able to sit looking out at the Langdale Valley in the Lake District, for example, while doing our work. This slide, it turns out, may not be immediately familiar to everybody. This is, I pinched the phrase, "What has normal ever done for us?" from Monty Python's film, The Life of Brian. These are the people plotting against the Romans, and the John Cleese character, in a rhetorical way, says, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" And gradually, of course, it emerges that they realize that the Romans have actually done rather a lot for them. Sanitation, roads, etc., etc., etc. So that's another reason for being keen to get back to something like normal, or something that we could call normal. And of course, what we're not talking about here is the this kind of normal, the am I normal doctor sort of normal. Over the recent 3 months, it's been perfectly normal to experience very unpleasant emotions. And that's not the normal that we're looking for. I think really what we're talking about when we talk about a new normal, or wanting to get back to normal, is a sense of familiarity. And this kind of normal, the sense of familiarity, does a great deal for us. It massively reduces the energy spent on decision making, for example. Much of what we do is routine, habit, reflex, and what's happened over the last 3 months is that really everything became very complicated. Even doing the shopping for food was complicated. Walking up the street became complicated. So one of the reasons we crave normality is because it means we can delegate so much of our choice to autopilot, and thereby save a good deal of energy. Another reason that we want normal is because it provides a sense of home. And to use John Bowlby's phrase, a secure base, which is one of the really powerful things that enables exploration. I was interested recently to come across the University of East Anglia's what they call the secure base model, which, well, there are plenty of models around, and I don't know how important it is to know this one, but I was interested to see that this model, which I haven't pictured here, it's a pentagon, and at each of the 5 corners is a word, and these are the 5 words: availability, sensitivity, cooperation, acceptance, and membership. Well, that's fine, but what really impressed me was that a number of these things are really the things that we have been trying to ensure are maintained in teams throughout this time, this last 3 months. We've been enjoining team leaders to be available, for example, for people to be normalizing distress and sensitive to people's feelings, not intrusive and demanding them to talk about their feelings, but sensitive to them. Cooperating, acceptance, membership, a sense again of agency, plenty others besides, but I was interested that this, I hadn't really thought about it at the time as helping to establish a secure base, but I think that's quite a good way of talking about it. But at any rate, normality, or a sense of familiarity, provides us with a secure base from which to do things. So approaching the new normal, I do suggest that we don't rush to an assumption that either the situation has returned to normal or that we have reached a new. Of course, it's never going to return to, things generally speaking don't return to how they were in the past, but nevertheless people are likely to hope that, some people are likely to hope that it will. But yes, so suggesting that we don't rush to an assumption that the situation has returned to normal or that we've reached a new steady state, because we haven't. And so it's important to just keep asking oneself, are we still in a battlefield situation where problems come? I'm in no way qualified, by the way, to talk about battlefield situations. And this, I don't play these games either. This, I took this image from, I think it's Battlefield 3. So I'm rather of the opposite persuasion, but it does seem to be a useful analogy to use. So are problems coming at us so fast that we can only really resort to reflex? Because if we are, then we're not really quite in a situation where we can stand back and think about what we want to do about the new normal. When we emerge from that battlefield situation, one of the things we may need to do is to notice what we've lost and grieve it, for want of a better word. I, as you know, come from a psychotherapeutic, psychiatric background, and foreground for that matter. And so I think that these things are useful. This is the burial ship at Sutton Hoo, which was, I think, thought to have been it's the burial of a king, an Anglo-Saxon king in, I think, the 600 and something. But I put it there as a reminder that warriors, when they get the opportunity, bury the dead. And so that's an important phase in approaching the new normal. The other picture is a picture of Michael Rosen, the children's author. The picture is by Quentin Blake, and it appears in Michael Rosen's Sad book. And I don't know if any of you will be familiar with this book, but it's really rather a wonderful book. Most of Michael Rosen's books are pretty upbeat and jolly. But he lost a son tragically in the son's late teens or early 20s, I think, a young adult son. And he wrote a book about this. And in it is this picture, and the caption is, "This is me being sad." And so there it is to remind us that one of the things that we sometimes do is to strap on a smiling face and bounce into the future. And I'm certainly of the persuasion that if we have lost something significant, it is important to acknowledge that. And then when we've got through that stage, we need to survey the situation. This is a picture of a man in the remains of his home near Tulsa in Arizona following a tornado. So we need to think about what the terrain is like, and then we can think about what we want to keep, what we might want to avoid, and what we might stand to gain and be able to gain out of the changed situation. And what are my levers? I like the metaphor of levers. The levers magnify our strength, but you do need a piece of firm ground purchase for them to work. And we need to think about what our needs are and what area we need to work on. This is Maslow's hierarchy, as it's called, not quite a hierarchy. There are many reasons for that. It's been criticized a great deal, actually, but it remains a very useful model, I think, helps to explain to us our own behavior. But one of the reasons I say it's not quite a hierarchy is that, for example, belongingness and love needs do need to be addressed, certainly before all of the physiological needs and safety needs are met, for example. So these things run in parallel, not necessarily in sequence. But it's a useful checklist, I think, of the key areas in order to make sure that we haven't forgotten any of them. So one of the things that I think will be helpful to not forget are the things that we learned in the last 3 months. And this is a list of some of the strategies that people have been using to reduce the traumatic impact of work during the most acute period of the pandemic. I don't think I really need to go through those. You'll be familiar with those. We can come back to them later if you want me to, if we want to discuss these. But I think the last 4 words are a good brief way of remembering it, really, that if we feel safe, at least relatively and reasonably safe, skilled, connected and prepared, we are generally in a better state in terms of protection against the emotional trauma in particular. But that will be, that's the sort of thing that you've been covering in the previous webinars, I think. Nevertheless, it's useful to be able to, it's important to remember them. So having reminded ourselves why the crisis was so threatening and why we might reasonably be eager to leave it behind and move forward, we've understood why we might wish for a situation that feels familiar, and we've checked ourselves for undue haste, and we've started to prioritize then. I'm not saying that we've actually got to this. I'm saying that that's a stage that we'll reach at some point, maybe now. So I'm going to offer a few ideas which really, for anyone who's not familiar with coaching process, may provide some sort of window into coaching process. I can't recreate a coaching situation here, obviously, but some of these ideas may prove useful to people in their own right. And coaching is largely an exercise in the effective prioritizing of work. I think that's quite a good brief definition. And what one might do is to start with a free description of the situation, and the coach would pick up on key content and cues. Where is the energy? What are the preoccupations? Where is the doubt or the frustration, for example? And are there any important issues neglected? I think this is something that not all coaches do. I think it depends on your background. I have a clinical background, and I therefore I think that that's probably one reason why I bring perhaps an arguably slightly paternalistic approach. If I thought I was working with someone who I felt was ignoring a massively important issue, I would hope to be able to introduce them to the possibility that that was the case, and help them to look at it. And then one begins to look ahead. This is a very common template or model. Whitmore produced this in the 90s, I think, in his book Coaching for Performance. But it crops up all over the place. This is the GROW model, or that's sometimes called the T-GROW model. And I've just sort of drawn up here some kind of examples, I suppose, or ideas of things that might distinguish the normal situation from the crisis situation, what sort of things might be preoccupying people and might be important. So the theme in a quote normal coaching situation might be career progression, whereas in a crisis it might be something more like safety and security and so on. The goals that one might look for in a normal situation would be possibly to increase the interest that one gets from one's work, or the responsibility that one has in one's work, or possibly one's pay grade. Whereas in a crisis, the main goal is to minimize threat. And then in the coaching situation, when one has got an idea of what one's goals might be, it's important then to do a reality check. And in a normal situation, this might include getting feedback from colleagues, checking out what the obstacles towards progress to these goals might be, thinking about what the opportunity costs might be. Somebody is off mute, perhaps if they could mute themselves. Be muted, thanks. And the aim of this is then to come up with an array of options for action. And I've highlighted choose and goals and commit, because these start to lead to the theme of values. And this is ACT. Stands for acceptance and commitment therapy, but this has been applied and can be applied in coaching situations. Joe Oliver is one person who has done this. And I think that I'm not going to talk a great deal about this. I'm not going to try and explain it, but to say that I think that the contribution of mindfulness has made is very welcome. Coaching for performance and performance measures in general can result in a lot of energy being wasted ruminating over failure, frustration, negative appraisal of the self or of other people. And mindfulness offers us a non-judgmental way of settling into how things are, which is a great position from which to figure out what our priorities are, and this is again where our values come in. Again, I'm happy to expand on this if anybody wants me to, and if we have time later on. So here we go, values our values, let's say. I took this from Mind Tools, which is an online resource. I haven't changed the wording of it. This is what they've said. But so our values are the things that we believe are important in the way that we live and work. And they should determine our priorities. But of course, they don't always. And that can lead to problems. Now, values are often assumed and not explicit. In fact, very often the very most important values are the ones that we take for granted. So it is possible to sort of forget the wood while we're looking at the trees, if you like. Values quite often have to be inferred or apprehended or discerned. And there are various ways in which one can do this. And I've just put down here a few. For example, in a very simple kind of way, one can use a card sort. I've got a set of cards with names of values on, and some blank ones so that people can come up with their own. But you scatter them all over the table, and you pick the 5 that seem most relevant and important to you. The future retrospective question is a useful one. Look back from 5 years in the future. Imagine yourself in some arbitrary point in the future, but it has to be a reasonable time in the future, obviously, and look back and what are the things that you've done that you're particularly pleased with. That can be quite a good indication of what one's values are. Actions speak louder than words. And so observing actions can quite often be an effective way of working out what our values are. And then this wheel of life is a very, this is another thing that crops up everywhere. It may very well be copyrighted, and I don't know who owns the copyright. It's in books and manuals and all over the place. But one can easily draw up one's own version of it. And I should think by now already you've figured out what you do with it if you haven't already used it. But the idea is that you can score different areas of your life in terms of their importance to you. And you can also score those areas in terms of how much time and energy you feel you've been putting into them. And of course, those two things don't always marry up, and you learn something in the process. And when one comes to then applying what one's learned from thinking about what one's values are, it quite often results in a desire to change one's behavior, or in fact, indeed, that kind of would be, in a way, a purpose, wouldn't it, of coaching or some other change process. But developing new behaviors is not a terribly straightforward thing to do. And this is where things like keeping diaries, having to-do lists, reflecting on the record, seeing if you've done what you said you were going to do, SMART goals, etc. This is where they come in, so that you can check if you have acted on your New Year's resolutions, if you like. And I've put down here a simplistic table, an example of the sort of thing that might happen. One might have been thinking about these value categories, friends and family, health, work, leisure, and thought about the value score that we gave them. This is a fictional person, of course. And then work out how much out of every 100 hours we've spent on each of these things. And lo and behold, we realize that we're spending more time on work than anything else. So this is useful. It can demonstrate to us that we aren't perhaps spending all the time that we thought we were on the things that we valued. It may also show that we hadn't got the values quite right in the first place. And of course, here, it becomes fairly swiftly obvious that one of the main things that work does for us is it meets a whole load of other values. So just incredibly simplistically, if we earn money from it and then we spend that money on our friends and family. So work, anyway, you'll have got the idea. I don't need to labour the point. Finally, because it's all quite hard work, I think, changing one's behaviour, and the point of this mindfulness and compassion angle, the there's a paradox about it, because the last 3 or 4 slides are all about being judgmental in a way, aren't they? They're about scoring things and thinking about what you value more than something else. But it's important not to be too hard on yourself. And so I suggest that pragmatism, if you like, or if you're into this kind of thing, which I am, incidentally, compassion, these things are important as well. And that's all I'm going to say for the moment. I shall stop showing my screen, and hopefully we'll be able to... Hello. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Andrew. That gallery view is impressive, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you for that great talk. Obviously, like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of apprehension around, and how we approach that is the question. Also, this bit of lull has given us opportunity to kind of reflect, like you said, on what's important. And maybe if we had known in the beginning about using this time up more fruitfully in that way, in terms of recognizing one's own priorities and one's own values, that would have been something to carry forward. And yes, families have become important, neighbors have become important in this current time. And from the previous talks, we have learned to kind of look after ourselves as well as look after everyone else, which you said, compassion. I think the to-do list and the reflective diaries are quite a useful thing. And I think we still have the opportunity. I don't think most of us have got back to what would have been the normal workload, and we still don't know what's in store for us in the next few days. Maybe that is what we need to kind of reinforce, just as a take-home message, that we recognize that there are things that we can do still to kind of utilize and be better in the new normal, whatever that may be. Thank you. We will take questions in a short bit. Can I please hand over to my co-host, Omo, who will introduce the topic that and the speakers that we may have in 2 weeks' time. Omo, are you able to unmute yourself, please, and talk?
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that. That was definitely, we've got a whole bunch of discussions and things to ask you, but just to let you know, next week we have Professor of Behavior Science from Warwick Business School, Professor Nick Powlby, will be speaking to us. And the topic will be anatomy of well-being at workplace. So I believe that will be very exciting. I'm sure there's lots and lots and lots of webinars surrounding well-being through this crisis, but you'll be interested to know that he's actually done a lot of work with London School of Economics, and he's done quite a lot of work surrounding well-being or happiness economics and behavior economics. And he's published over 50 articles. He's also written a book, which I would encourage you to go ahead and have a look at it. It's called Happiness Equation. And he talks about the surprising economics of the most valuable assets in the workplace, which I'm sure your imagination will probably go very far to know what that is. There's also a very, very, very good book as well. He's also called The Origins of Happiness. And it's all based around scientific evidence out there. So it's not just hearsay, it's very much backed and underpinned by evidence base. So we'll have Professor Nick with us next week, in 2 weeks' time, talking about the anatomy of well-being at workplace. So
Thank you, Omo. Yeah.
Very welcome. I think it's probably, I think my first question to yourself, Andrew, would be, you spoke about the different kind of categories of people within the workplace in terms of managing a new norm. And I think one of the questions somebody's asked was, do you find that risk takers tend to be better able to manage the change? And in an organization, how do you then carry along everyone who doesn't have the same risk palette as maybe some people are risk takers and the you know, they're happy to go ahead, but what about the cautious person who's more cautious and apprehensive? How would, as a leader, do you embrace everybody's coping strategy? Thank you.
I think that's a great question. I think that risk takers can appear to be best prepared, but that's because they leap into the front, don't they? This is, I mean, I think that the way I'd answer that is to suggest that we think of caution as a skill and as risk taking as a skill. And like all skills, they have their place. And therefore a team needs a variety of skills. And I think I would ask team leaders to think about what the skills are that the cautious person has. The overcautious person is the person who's really rather too good at predicting problems. But predicting problems is a jolly useful thing to do. You then just have to not behave as though they're all going to happen. So I think that's a rather, perhaps, I hope it doesn't sound like a glib answer. I think that would be how I would approach that.
So I guess understand the different merits of the characteristics of the people and saying there's good in all of it. Is that? Absolutely.
I mean, I doubt if, surely one, yes. So we're not going to go through our team saying, I don't value your skills, I don't value your skills. I mean, actually, perhaps we do, perhaps some people do, and that would be a tragedy, wouldn't it? I mean, so I really hope that team leaders will, frame the characteristics of each of their team members as skills. By all means, team members may want to build up certain skills that they feel that they are missing out on in some kind of way, or they would like to be more of one thing or another, and that's fine. And we all do build on our skills. But I hope that team leaders would frame characteristics of team members as skills, or at least as resources, and then think about how they can distribute those resources and use people to their best advantage, where people can contribute most to the team.
I like that framing. If we pretend it has gone, we are okay. Also, a loss of faith in government and a bizarre petulance of I shall do what I want because you, the government, do. How can we change this? Okay, now, do you mind just reading it again? Because I think there might be two quite big ones. Yes. So, I wonder whether there's also been a denial. If we pretend it has gone, we are okay. Yep, okay, got that one. And what's the next one? I'll do them in order. Also a loss of faith. I'm going to ask if Stephen could come on, because I can see him here. I'm reading his question and maybe it's a great question, but yeah, by all means, Stephen, yeah. Stephen, do you want to come on? If he's still there. But let me go to the second one and he can jump on. Just Ali, if you can unmute him if you can, but if not, let me go ahead.
I don't see him online just now.
Okay. Also, a loss of faith in the government and a bizarre petulance of I shall do what I want. You, the government, do. So, you know, they're kind of saying, well, you do it, so why can't I? How can we change this? Yes. Okay. So I'll start with that one, actually, and go back to the denial, perhaps, because I think it's placed a lot of people in a leadery position, in a very difficult position, actually. There's been a good deal of discussion, hasn't there, on social media, for example, about Dominic Cummings trotting off to Barnard Castle. And a lot of people argue that this has contributed to other people breaking the restrictions. I think there's been quite inconsistent policing of restrictions. And I think that also the restrictions have not been very clearly enunciated. Quite often they've been a little bit vague.
we do live in a time where we can scrutinize our leaders' behavior and actions to a very great degree, and there's very open debate. And so I, just to kind of try not to be too politically partisan myself, I'm going to suggest that it might be a rather hard time to set out a plan for a country. Having said that, we certainly also are in the echo chambers saying there are a lot of other countries that are doing it much better than we are.
Yes.
So it's difficult. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a right and wrong about, you know, which governments have done it right and which have done it wrong. You know, I've heard the argument, for example, about New Zealand, and then someone points out that it's an island a long way from most other places, and small population, large population density, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think it is a bit of a problem that a lot of people perceive the management, the government's management of this, as having been not hugely competent. And yes, I think that that probably does contribute to people saying, I'll do what I want. And people have said that I'll do what I want in both directions. So some people have said, to hell with it, I'm going to go and have a barbecue with 50 people in the park. And other people have said, I'm not coming out of my house, thank you. I'm going to carry on with my home deliveries. And, you know, I've come across plenty of people who have done less than, well, when the government started lifting restrictions, I think most thinking people knew that our world had not suddenly become safer. Yes, so it's problematic, and I do think that governing people in this situation is probably rather difficult as well.
Yeah.
Back to the denial question. If we pretend it has gone, we're okay. Yes, that's almost magical thinking, isn't it? If I pretend it's gone, I'll be immune. Well, it's a numbers game, and I mean, large numbers of people have been affected. Tragically, large numbers of people have been affected and have died, but it still remains a minority. So unless you're in a very high-risk group or you engage in a very high-risk behavior, I guess that numerically the chances are still in an individual's favor. And then I suppose you have this effect of, well, I've been doing this for weeks now and I haven't got infected, so therefore it must be okay.
Yeah.
And that could just be how many times do you spin the barrel and pull the trigger? So yes, I think that people do deny things in all sorts of directions. I don't think I can answer that question better than that, really.
No, that's fair enough. Thank you. What are your thoughts around people's well-being, especially frontline workers, following this incident?
Well,
pandemic, should I say? It's not an incident, it's a pandemic.
Yes, I know, but one does get tired of saying the word pandemic, doesn't it? Yes, I mean, I think that traumatic reactions have a way of emerging later. So I think it's difficult to predict accurately. Those are two different bits of the answer, actually. It's difficult to predict, and we do know that traumatic reactions emerge later. So I think we have to be ready for them to emerge over a long period of time. And be triggered in different kinds of ways. There will be different triggers for people's traumatic reactions. I think that we need to continue, teams need to continue with, as I suggested, actually, a number of the things that we learned about looking after our teams in the last 3 months. And I think we need to continue with those so that we continue to communicate well within teams. People need to continue to be supported by the team leaders so that they feel engaged, that they feel that they're listened to, that they feel that they have some kind of agency in the running of the team. I think that we need to continue to remain sensitive to people's needs and emotions. I think we need to normalize distress. I think we need to not go around hunting down distress. So I'm not suggesting that there need to be these debriefing meetings where everybody's encouraged to emote. I think we all understand now that those have turned out to be problematic. But I think we need to allow people to be distressed and allow people to communicate and allow a difference. This almost goes back to the first question about risk-taking and caution. Allow people to be different and have different ways of coping, so that some people will cope by immense physical activity, and others will cope by meditation. You know, so each people hopefully can be helped to figure out what works best for them. So I think probably continuing with that is my best answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. I think you spoke a bit about acceptance and commitment therapy. There was a question about if you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Okay, yes. So acceptance and commitment therapy, I don't know the historical origins of it, but the approach, broadly speaking, does start with you can't really launch until you know where you are, kind of thing. And it starts with basically a mindful, developing mindfulness skills and appreciating, learning how to be open to one's surroundings, open to one's present experience. So I think the three things, they're on the slide, but aware, open, and then committed. Well, it's a jump to commitment. But so it starts with mindfulness, really, which is a non-judgmental, the practice of non-judgmental focusing of the attention on the here and now. And usually it uses, it's a meditation technique really, and typically one uses the breath as an anchor. It's a useful metaphor, the breath, because, because we can't breathe for yesterday and we can't breathe for tomorrow. I've got Vivek, your screen. Oh, thank you. You've put that up there. Yes. Open, aware, active. Yes. Commit, active. Thanks. Yes, where was I? Mindfulness for the here and now and non-judgmentally. So that's means that whatever the experience is, we don't necessarily feel that we need to label it, either establish exactly what it is or decide whether it's good or bad, but simply that is what is happening. And so compassion, mindfulness and compassion are the same thing, but they're clearly very linked. And I think compassionate acceptance of oneself and one's situation is a useful place from which one can then start to explore what one's values are, what one wants to do, and then building action on that. And incredibly briefly, that is what I understand acceptance and commitment therapy to be. And it's really not a very big jump to transfer that to to a sort of coaching situation or a self-care situation or a team management situation in a way, I suppose, although one doesn't really want teams to be run like therapy groups.
Yeah, the good thing is you can look after yourself through this.
Yes.
Stop share again.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Vivek.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you. Any other questions, Omo or Ali or Matt?
Could I come in, please? I think it's relevant that we discuss burnout. How much, I'll ask you a series of questions, Andrew, relating to that. How much burnout are you perceiving around you in your role as a psychiatrist? You see colleagues at work and you're obviously experiencing people. Have you seen an increase in referrals? So what's your sort of perception of the burnout situation currently?
Well, I can't really answer that question very effectively. Somebody else may be. I'm not a tremendous book person or kind of facts in the head kind of person, and many people are. But so I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and we haven't really got a child equivalent of burnout. I think burnout is probably related to depression. I think that I rather like the animal model of actually learned helplessness of depression. And I think that there's an element of learned helplessness about burnout. And just to jump to another animal metaphor, I suppose, the hamster in the wheel kind of thing. I think, I mean, I suppose one of the reasons I'm hesitating is because I've got a lot of hobby horses rather kind of connected to this. And I think there's a slight risk that I'll go hobby horsing off and I don't know, speak out of turn. I'm trying to be as, I'm trying to sound authoritative about something which really I feel quite passionate about. I don't know whether there's an increase in burnout or not. I think it's a real problem. I think that the more one quantifies work and the less one prioritizes the personal aspects of work, the more prone we are to burning people out. So it bothers me when we treat team members as exchangeable units of production, if you like, and it bothers me when patients are become case numbers and so on. That's been going on for a long time. You know, remember the nursing research on the liver in bed 14 or whatever it is. You know, we're at risk of depersonalizing people in all sorts of ways. But I do think that contributes to burnout, and I think a contracting economy, I think some of the political changes that have been happening, I do think these are all likely to contribute to burnout. And yeah.
In the context of the pandemic, you mean?
No. In context of pandemic, I think that actually burnout is probably, this is not an authoritative answer, but what I think, a hunch, if you like, my hunch is that burnout is less likely during an acute phase of a pandemic. I think that because it's a bit like a battlefield, you know. I mean, I think that you might get something more like shell shock. People are just so caught by the traumatic onslaught that they cease being able to function. But I wouldn't describe that as burnout. I think it's just sort of overload, really. So I don't think I would associate burnout as particularly a phenomenon of the pandemic. I think that trauma is more likely to be. Incidentally, I do see trauma as a systemic problem, not necessarily as an individual one. And so there is vicarious trauma. For example, people who feel closely associated with somebody traumatized can be traumatized themselves. And also we've seen a lot of this, I think, survivor guilt, or a different kind of guilt of people who've noticed a drop, you know, the A&E departments that noticed for a period a big drop in their cases, and they knew that their colleagues on the ICU were running around like headless chickens, and they were saying, well, we're seeing less work than usual. So I think that there have been, and also people working from home, people in perhaps relatively senior positions working from home and knowing that there were people in less well paid than themselves who were exposed to a greater risk with a lack of PPE, etc. These are all, so I don't personally describe those as burnout, more as traumatic phenomena, really.
Sure. I mean, my concern is that, you know, there is academic theory about the fact that de-skilling causes demotivation, and demotivation could potentially cause factors that lead to burnout, such as depression. And I totally agree with you in that the pandemic obviously pushed people up a higher scale on the Maslow's hierarchy, where they were wanting to actually do their best rather than just survive and excel.
Well,
obviously there's a deflationary cycle.
Yes, or possibly it did the opposite, Ali, and pushed people down to survival, which, and so that, you know, okay, some of us, I guess I was one of the people who was fortunate enough to be able to take advantage of lockdown and do more gardening than I usually do. But that's because I retired from my, it was in a way very good timing, and I've managed not to suffer too much from survivor guilt either. But I completely though about skill and agency, feeling skilled, feeling competent, skilled, belonging to a team, knowing that you're making a valued contribution, a contribution that's valued by yourself and is also valued by other people. The Thursday clapping was great, wasn't it? The problem was how to stop it. And also people were saying, look, we actually could do with resources, PPE. I keep coming back to that, but it's, you know, it stands for a lot, doesn't it? Give us PPE and resources rather than clapping. But I mean, it was good that people felt appreciated, I think. And I think that reduces the risk of burnout and trauma for that matter.
So for people who are actually feeling sad, people who are very concerned about the themes emerging in the chat box about suicide, about not feeling great, what would your advice be to them? And what would your advice be to senior leaders amongst us, and for us to take the message about how they can support people who are feeling a bit vulnerable at the moment and to prevent people from feeling vulnerable?
Well, it's difficult to, yes, you can't really prevent people from feeling vulnerable. This almost goes back to the first question about risk takers. I mean, there is a category of people, I think, who tend not to feel vulnerable. That doesn't mean that they're not at risk, of course. Yes, so I think that what one doesn't want is to unnecessarily medicalize normal distress. But there will be a proportion of people who do get precipitated into major anxiety disorders, into depression, and they will need the appropriate help. They'll need skilled help. I mean, I think we may, and I know the Royal College of Psychiatrists is thinking about this and has been thinking about it, is what role should psychiatrists have in this? Because not everybody needs to see a psychiatrist. I mean, that's a terrible idea, actually. So probably psychiatrists should be involved at a higher level than that. But on the other hand, trotting out a standard 6 or 8 week CPT program, sort of IAPT style, probably isn't quite the right thing either, particularly for health workers.
I think Rajan Nigam makes a valid point that quite often it is a difference between expectations and the reality. And that probably can be unrealistic, and that then compounds the problem. And certainly the pandemic and the COVID situation hasn't helped. And I think there's a lot that we have to be grateful for. And I recall reading as a child what Mahatma Gandhi had written. It's probably him, but it may have been borrowed from someone else, about comparing yourself to someone below you rather than someone above you. And then you realize how lucky you are and how privileged you are, as in us, some of us are, to be alive, to be healthy, to have jobs, not worry about many things. But yeah, some people may not be in that situation, I suppose.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for answering all these questions, which are very difficult to answer. For, as you said, talking to a group is different to dealing with individuals' needs. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate you being here today.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a great pleasure, and it's been an interesting thing to do. And I think one of the things that I've been saying in a way is that the new phase may not be so very different from what's been going on in the last 3 months. And I think that many of those supports that you have been providing will continue to be valuable for some time in the future. So I hope that this group continues, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So I guess we'll, is that me closing? Just want to thank everyone for being here, but we want to invite you to, in 2 weeks' time, on the 15th of July, as I said, we're going to have Professor Nick sharing about the anatomy of well-being. Vivek, I don't know if we are doing this as CPD, but it's not confirmed.
Yes, sorry, I should have mentioned at the beginning. Now, there was some query about this being recognized, but we have had confirmation of this session being recognized for the 1 CPD as well. So yes, if you have attended, you can self-certify yourself for that 1 CPD for the hour. We just need your registration with us as almost as an attendance log, please. So if you could please email the 2 emails I have for myself and Ali, so we can have you registered for this session. Unfortunately, we are not in a position to issue certificates, but we can certainly send out emails if you wanted confirmation from us, but you can very well put it on your own CPD diary. But Royal College is happy to recognize that. Thank you.